Today we're going to be talking about World War II. World War II is probably the most famous of all the different wars, and kind of the question, why is that? What is it that makes World War II so intriguing, and why is it that World War II is so famous? And we're going to try to address some of those questions today. We're going to be dealing with kind of two parts today. We're going to be talking about the interwar period, the period between World War I and World War II, and then the actual kind of origins and then start of World War II. And you'll be following along and filling in your notes as we go along. So the interwar period basically starts after World War I ends and goes until the official start of World War II. So if we think back to World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, remember that Woodrow Wilson, who is President of the United States, shows up, and what was the name of that plan that he came up with? Remember, it was the 14 points. The most important part of his plan was the League of Nations. So the League of Nations, remember, was an organization that was established to prevent future wars. Now, of course, the League of Nations doesn't exist today. Instead, we have the United Nations. So the United Nations is formed during the end of World War II, and will try to kind of solve the issues that the League of Nations had. The United States is one who came up with this idea, but as we discussed before, America never signs the Treaty of Versailles, so the United States never became a member of the League of Nations. Ultimately, the League fails because it didn't have enough power. Remember that France had urged for them to have a military, but that never happens. The League of Nations really does nothing to stop the aggressive acts of Japan and Italy and Germany, so therefore World War II is not prevented. During this time period, we also have a massive depression going on in the world. We basically kind of come out of this World War I. America especially really builds up, has this amazing economy. We're doing really well. Think back to what you studied like in 6th grade. Think about the roaring 20s, like how good everything was going. And then it comes to a crashing halt when what happens in the United States? The stock market crash. So for the first time after World War I, there's like this unbelievable prosperity, but then we have this huge depression. So what causes it? Well, one, the United States was dominating the global economy. So when the U.S.'s economy fails, it basically brings everybody else down. We had this kind of production capacity, like we were just producing too much, and then that leads to a short fall in prices. Combine that with high protective tariffs, which remember is when countries are putting taxes on imports, and so that makes it difficult to trade with people. And then especially in the U.S., this is a big problem, the excessive expansion of credit, which is actually one of the things that led to our recent recession in the United States. All of this kind of combined, then ultimately with the catalyst, remember that spark that kind of starts it all, is the stock market crash in the United States in 1929. And so the stock market crash then, when the United States enters into what we call our Great Depression, then the rest of the world comes along with us. This especially hits Germany hard because after World War I, we really began to trade a lot with Germany, trying to help rebuild their economy after World War I. And so when our economy is doing so bad, we can no longer kind of trade and help Germany as much, and therefore Germany was especially hit hard because of our involvement. So what is the impact of this depression? It leads to high unemployment in industrial countries. The worst it ever gets in America is in the high 20s. Some statistics say as high as 25%. Compared to when you think about like the average within the last recession, most places were around like 8-10%. I know Danville at one point and Martinsville, which are kind of bad areas around here, got up to like 18%. In a capitalist economy, you want to have a little bit of unemployment, but you want to keep it more like around 5%, not 20%. The worst place is Germany, where it's upwards of 30% of people are unemployed. Banks fail and they collapse. The prices also begin to drop. And this is going to lead for an opening in Germany for a group, the Nazi Party, who are blaming all of their economic problems on the European Jews. Stereotypically, this is kind of one of those stereotypes, Jews were known to be in banking and to do well financially. And so because of that, there was almost like this kind of envy, and they began to blame the Jews, particularly in Germany. The Nazis and Hitler were blaming the Jews for the economic problems of Germany. So we began to see this rise of dictators after World War I, where because things are kind of going so bad with the economic systems, we start to see leaders step up and begin to take more and more control in their countries. And we're going to talk about 4 of those dictators today. And we'll start with one that we've already talked about. We know that communism was established in the Soviet Union, and Vladimir Lenin was the first leader of the Soviet Union. And then after his death, Joseph Stalin, frowny face, comes into the Soviet Union to be the next leader. And Stalin will be the leader during World War II. The Treaty of Versailles, as we said, had deepened the economic conditions in Europe, and especially, Italy and Germany, because remember, Italy, think about that skit we did, what about my land, what about my land? Italy doesn't get any of the land that they were promised. Germany, not only do they have land taken away, but they're also having to pay reparations, which is extremely difficult. How do you pay back all of this money suddenly that you owe? Specifically, those countries then are going to be ripe for kind of these men to step in the case of Italy, Mussolini, in the case of Germany, Hitler, guys to step in and say, I'm going to solve these economic problems. Japan also has kind of, had that taste of imperialism thanks to the Great White Fleet and the Americans coming in and kind of opening up Japan. They're really looking to conquer more areas. Think about Japan. Japan has very few natural resources, beautiful archipelago country, but just doesn't have a whole lot of natural resources. So they really began to turn to China and Korea as to expand. So let's start with Adolf Hitler, probably the most famous of our dictators from World War II. And Adolf Hitler will eventually be ruling Germany. And he is a fascist dictator of Germany. Now we're going to talk about what fascism is in just a minute, and the leader of the Nazi Party. So when the American stock market crashes, especially in Germany, Germany is one of the worst ones. Germany does have a democracy at this time period. Think back, who was it who helped to unite Germany? That was Bismarck. And Germany does have a democracy, but they're not able to kind of cope with all of the problems that they're having. During this time period, there's kind of this little young man who's kind of stirring up trouble. He is kind of basically starts a bar fight in, I can't remember if it was Berlin or Munich. And anyway, he basically gets arrested. While he's in jail, it was in Munich in 1923, he had basically tried to start this whole kind of revolution, and it doesn't work. So in jail, he writes a book called Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf means my struggle. And basically, he said that if he was in power, this is what he would do. Now, it's interesting when you think about Mein Kampf. Back then, the book wasn't really that popular. But when we look at it now, we read it and we're like, how did you people not see what Hitler was going to do? Like, he seriously says, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And he pretty much follows the outline of what he had done in Mein Kampf. Ultimately, these are the main ideas of Mein Kampf. The Aryan race superiority, that basically the Aryans, who are descendants of kind of the Western European, Scandinavian-ish people, were going to be the dominant race, and basically everybody else was inferior and kind of should be wiped out. Then he also wanted to expand Germany and have all Germans united. In doing so, he would need something called Lebensraum, which is living space, and that basically would justify Germany taking over other lands. And ultimately, he also talked about his hatred of the Jews, who he argued were to blame for most problems. Now, there's lots of stories about why Hitler particularly hated the Jews. I'm sure you all probably have heard some story about, I've heard different ones about how that he applied for art school and was denied, and it was a Jewish teacher who didn't take him in. Heard a story about how his mother died and the doctor was Jewish, and he blamed it doesn't really matter. He was very anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic means someone who dislikes the Jews. And he's not the first person to be anti-Semitic. He just takes it to a whole new level. And we are going to talk about that a little bit later next week as well. But basically, he believed that the Jewish race and also the Slavic people, like people from Russia and stuff, were the basically the lowest stock of people. He kind of thought of people almost in the way that we think about like breeding cattle or such. Basically, Hitler is promising to make life better. Look, a couple of pictures I want you to look at here. Think about, I mentioned how bad the unemployment was. Inflation also reaches a ridiculous level. Basically, at the end of World War I, to buy a cup of coffee in Germany, it cost you about 4.5 German marks, which is like basically equal to, I believe, about 50 cents. Before World War II starts, it costs 5,000 German marks to buy a cup of coffee. 5,000. We go from 4.5, almost 5, let's just say 5 marks to 5,000. So inflation actually reached 1,000%. Inflation is normal. When I was in high school, Taco Bell was a pretty new thing, and I used to like to go to Taco Bell, and a soft taco cost like 49 cents. If I go to Taco Bell now, a soft taco costs me like 89 cents or 99 cents. That's inflation. That's normal. Prices increase over time. You probably heard your parents or your grandparents complain about prices. Oh, this used to only cost such and such. You know how much like gas has even changed prices during your lifetime. But to increase to a percent from 5 to 5,000, that is called hyperinflation. You also can look here at this unemployment chart here, and you look as the unemployment in Germany increases. Notice what happens to the Nazi Party vote, how the Nazi Party gets supported more and more as the inflation is increasing in Germany. You see here these children, how they're playing with, it looks like building blocks. This is actually stacks of money. This young woman here is burning money. It was actually cheaper to burn money because burning the money would last longer than the amount of wood that you could buy with that money. Okay, that's how bad it got. Basically, the Germans, remember, they're paying reparations. So their answer to how to solve the problem of hyperinflation, or basically of the reparations, was to print more money. And this printing more money does not solve the answer. Ultimately led to more money being in the market, and it led to hyperinflation. Okay, so again, the Germans tried to solve their problem by just printing more money, which ultimately only made the situation worse. So Hitler is